So I'm back. Swipe easy again. All right. So look, were ancient Europeans black? Yes and no. This depends on what your definition of black is. DNA testing of Cheddarman, Britain's earliest known Homo sapiens skeletons from around 10,000 YBP, showed that he had dark skin and curly/wavy hair. However, genetic testing also shows that the specimen was much more closely related to the modern-day British population. Cheddarman might very well be an ancestor of the vast majority of white British people than to any modern-day population in sub-Saharan Africa. It is almost certain that the very first Homo sapiens on Earth had dark skin and curly/wavy hair. Genetic testing, as well as the existence of residual dark skin/curly hair populations outside of Africa, i.e., the people of the Ottoman Islands, Negritos in Southeast Asia, Melanesians, Australian Aboriginals, etc., strongly suggest this. So in a couple videos ago, I spoke on the Ottoman Islands and Negritos, stuff like that. So next, but virtually all the dark-skinned/curly-haired peoples who were indigenous to places outside of Africa showed much closer genetic affinities to surrounding non-black populations than to any group in sub-Saharan Africa. It is important to note that the human population has been genetically divergent for tens of thousands of years, and that the genes for dark skin, curly hair make only a tiny part of the human genome. Thus, having dark skin/curly hair does not necessarily make one closely related to sub-Saharan African populations, the people who are mostly associated with the modern definition of black. The genes for light skin/straight hair likely came from early modern humans interbreeding with other human species such as Neanderthals. This doesn't mean that Cheddarman had sex with a Neanderthal woman, but he or his descendants/relatives had likely interbred with other humans who had partial Neanderthal ancestry from a much earlier period. So they're still trying to say like Cheddarman's not black, but you can look at Cheddarman and tell he's black, one of the originals. But anyway, in short, Cheddarman has probably other prehistoric Europeans were black in appearance, but are more closely related to modern day white people than to most modern day black people. Well, that's true because the original Europeans were black. But anyway, were ancient Europeans black? Neanderthals are thought to have had more than one skin tone and preceded us in Europe, so some were not. As far as our species go, there is a famous find from Spain of a darker skinned man, even if not black. Ancient European genomes reveal jumbled ancestry. I'm sorry, I can't even read off what I'm reading. I can't really see it. So where in Europe might matter for drawing conclusions about skin tone, but mostly the skin color isn't known since we don't have DNA going back as far as our species itself goes and don't know who moved where when talking about the end of the Ice Age. Certainly not all were pale skinned as most Europeans now, but were each began. Who replaced whom, when, etc., is unknown until more recent time, like the Stonehenge builders. It is also possible that Coetian people entered Europe before others, and that is evidence is lacking. So they lacking evidence about the Coetians, but the Coetians is a tribe in Africa that looks black and Asian. But anyway, were white people the first inhabitants of Europe? The first inhabitants of Europe were closely Homo. I'm not even going to say that dinosaur monkey name. And what color the skin was, no one can say. Probably started as dark when they first left Africa, then lightened as they adapted to northern conditions. They eventually evolved into Neanderthals in Europe, but back in Africa, they took a slightly different path and evolved into us, Homo sapiens. When Homo sapiens first arrived in the Middle East in Europe, they would have undoubtedly been dark-skinned Africans. So to answer your questions, no, the first Homo sapiens in Europe would have been black. There is no such thing as white. There's no such thing as white. We know where the white man came from. I could tell you where the white man came from. I mean, you could look at a black couple have an albino, but I ain't coming for all of that. So there's no such thing as white people of our species yet. Eventually, either by cross mating with Neanderthals or just by repeating the same evolutionary process, their skin color would have also gradually lightened to adapt better to lower levels of sunlight in Europe. The same process repeated in Asia, but on an entirely different gene. So this genetic stuff is deep. they trying to separate the races and stuff, but it's all more some ego shit. Like, oh, like, you feel me? The black race versus the Asian race or the white man. It's just some ego power trip shit. But they trying to tell you that Cheddar Man's not black, but clearly, I ain't even gotta say too much. Yeah, so Swipe Beats out. Y'all niggas know.